On today's episode, number 34 of the Real Recovery Podcast, we sit down with John Morgan, a man whose life journey is nothing short of remarkable. From facing challenges at an early age, growing up in a world filled with crime, addiction, and incarceration, John transformed his life against all odds. Now, as the founder of Another Chance Recovery, he shares his story of resilience, redemption, and hope. Join us as we explore how John built a new path to recovery, offering second chances to those who need them most.
Hello, and welcome to the Real Recovery Podcast. I'm Julie, your co-host. On this journey of healing and transformation, together with my co-host Peter, we dive into the heart of recovery, sharing stories that resonate with courage and inspiration.
That's right, Julie. Each episode is a new chapter in this vast narrative of recovery, and we're honored to bring them to you. But keep in mind, the perspectives you'll hear are for informational purposes only and may not reflect the views of the podcast or our partners.
Indeed, while these conversations can be a powerful part of your recovery toolkit, they are not substitute for professional medical advice. We encourage you to seek guidance from your healthcare provider for any treatment-related decisions.
And if you're facing an immediate crisis, or if you just need to talk to someone who understands, don't hesitate to call the Recovery Crisis Line at 503-223-8569. That number is also on our website. Help is available 24/7.
Now let's begin our episode
of recovery, real recovery.
I'm going to start and welcome you to the Real Recovery Podcast. This is Julie.
And Peter.
And John.
We're at Another Chance, and John took time out of his busy day to see us, and we're excited.
We're very appreciative.
Very
This is awesome.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here, and I can't wait to hear about your journey, and then also what you do here and what this facility is all about. Our listeners, we know we've gathered a little bit of intel, but our listeners, they have no idea. So
we have a couple from here. We recorded in your little office over there. We'd like that one. Yeah, I've chaired a meeting here on Tuesday night.
I'll be back, I think, on the 9th to chair a meeting.
Yeah, and my sponsor.
So we're getting to know the facility a little bit, but we don't know much about you.
Graduated from here successfully, so that's good.
Nice.
Yeah.
You want me to start my
story? Where did it start with you?
Well,
tell us a little bit about you.
70, I was born here in Portland, Oregon, Emmanuel Hospital, and I was born into a family that lived outside the norm, which became the norm for me. So criminal type activity, drinking, things like that, violence became pretty much a way of life for me. I committed my first crime when I was 6 and got into pretty big trouble for that.
At 6?
At 6, yeah.
What do you do at 6? Just
you steal a candy bar from the neighborhood store, and then you steal the rent money out of your mom's purse and take all your friends out to the neighborhood store. And so it became this like thing that I did. It didn't really make sense to me that it was wrong, right? It was like I was raised by my dad to, if you can take it, it's yours, and once it's yours, don't ever let anybody else take it from you, right? There's a thinking error called lack of time perspective, and that really something I suffered from because I never learned from my experiences, right? I never learned from the lessons that I was getting, right? And so I just continued to do that. And then I got this thing called ownership attitude, which meant that everything in the world should belong to me. If I saw somebody driving a nice car, why do they deserve that and I don't?
Oh.
Why do you get to have that nice house and I don't? And I deserved it and you didn't. That uniqueness of I was born with less than, so I deserve. And then you couple that with the whole world is out to get you, because at 6 years old, the world is out to get you if you're little, right? And my response to that turned to violence. And by 9, I was locked up in an institution for boys called Parrot Creek Ranch. And I went there. Wait, no, it wasn't Parrot Creek Ranch. It was Edgefield Manor for Children was the first place I was.
Oh, really?
Locked
up.
And that place was the alternative to school, because I got kicked out of 17 elementary schools every time for violence. If it wasn't against a staff member, it was against a student. And it was never my fault, right? They were out to get me.
Yeah.
And I had to defend myself. And so it got to a point where the Portland Public School says, we're not going to have him. And so I went to this Edgefield Manor for Children, was there for about 17, 18 months. And so what that taught me was being locked up wasn't scary. So the deterrent that most people had of going to jail or being locked up didn't work with me. Like, oh, we're gonna, like the police didn't scare me, which made me even more active in criminality and things like that. And so criminality is actually my first drug of choice. At 9, I started smoking marijuana on a pretty regular basis, and then I started doing meth for a little bit. I didn't really like it that much at that time, and so around the age of 15, of course, I've been locked up, arrested, in fights, in battles, shoplifting, kiting checks, things like that, pawning. There was a pawn shop by my house that would let me pawn stuff there, even though I wasn't of age. I was very resourceful.
Sounds like it. Super intelligent.
And I didn't think so. Interesting. I didn't think I was super intelligent because I couldn't do anything. I wasn't book smart. What I found out later on was I actually am book smart. It was just too boring for me, so I had to occupy myself. I have ADHD, grew up in a violent home. The types of lessons I got were very interesting. I remember I got caught shoplifting at Fred Meyer's on 82nd and Foster here in Portland one time. And of course they called my mom and dad and they had to come get me. And I got a little bit nervous when I was there and basically told on myself. I'm like, yeah, I did it. Blah, blah, blah. And I got home and I remember walking in the door and my dad hitting me so hard that I went through the closet door. The closet door busted.
Wow.
And I was surprised because he supported my criminality. I watched him shoplift numerous times. He would never hid his criminality from me. And I'm like, what was that for? In tears. And he says, that's for telling on yourself.
Wow.
He says, you never tell on yourself. You never tell on your family. We handle our stuff in-house,
Privately.
right? We handle our stuff privately. And the only time you were allowed to call the police was if somebody stole your car because you had to get your car back. Like, it wasn't like my mother and father fought violently and the cops never came to my house. My dad never got arrested for domestic. That kind of stuff just didn't happen. And so I grew up in that kind of a lifestyle. So I assimilated that kind of a lifestyle.
Yeah.
What you knew.
Yeah. At the age of 16, we moved to Yakima, Washington. I graduated the 8th grade from Donald Lee Longhome, not because I was incarcerated there, but because none of the Portland public schools would take me. And lots of violence, fights in schools. And then I moved to Yakima, Washington. Actually, it was East Sela in the middle of this cow pasture in a single wide trailer. And it was culture shock for me. And of course, I got into more trouble, started stealing cars, doing that kind of stuff, committing burglaries, a little bit bigger crimes as I got older. And then I discovered crack cocaine, which it was powder cocaine when I got it, but we were smoking it off of tinfoil, which is essentially crack. I didn't know that at the time. And it happened on a lunch break. I was attending an alternative school because I'd only been there like a year and a half in Yakima. And of course I got kicked out of the high school there. And there was this alternative school called The Place. And one of my buddies said, hey, let's go to my house for lunch. And I remember smoking this cocaine and listening to Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd and thinking that this just solved all my problems.
Right.
That was I remember it was almost instantaneously, this is it.
It's funny that you didn't like meth, but you liked coke. It was reversed for me.
It's interesting because later on it switches, right? Because crack is terrible. Like that is like the worst drug ever because all you want is more, right?
And it's expensive.
Well,
Good stuff.
yeah, expensive is as long as I'm not spending my money and I'm spending yours, right? Then
There you go.
or the merchant down the street. And so it got pretty bad to where I got pretty brazen. And one of my stores, I drove my 73 Nova through the front of an electronics store and loaded the car up with electronics, VCRs and stereo equipment and things like that, and drove straight to the dealer's house and just started trading. And
That is bold.
yeah. And so I met this guy who was connected with the Mexican somebodies, and he asked me if I wanted a job. I was 17 years old, and I said, doing what? And he goes, driving a car. And I'm like, okay. And he said, this is what we want to do. We want you to pick up this car here. We want you to drive it over here. We want you to pick up that car there and drive it back. And I'm like, I can do that. He goes, you can't look in the trunk. You can't look under the seats. You just get in the car. You just drive. And so I started doing that. And that was an amazing job for a 17-year-old kid who got a half ounce of powder cocaine and $500 cash for doing this every time,
Wow.
2 or 3 times a week.
Wow.
So I started doing that, and it went pretty smooth for a while. And I thought it was great because they were really cool cars like SS Impalas and Novas and hot rods. And
Yeah.
occasionally a station wagon. Like they were cool cars, and I got to drive them there and then drive a different car back. And I never knew what was in the cars until I got into a altercation with my girlfriend at the time. At the time I was 17, she was 35. I was living with her, and which was a great education.
I bet.
Yeah, and so we got into a fight one night, and she called the police, and she told them what kind of car I was driving. They pulled me over, and I gave them a fake name, and of course it's a small town. They knew who I was. And they found a kilo of cocaine in the car. And so I went to jail for that, and I just turned 18 when that happened.
So you got adult time.
Went to the big boy jail and spent almost a year in the jail fighting that case, ending up winning the case because my fingerprints were on the bag. The car wasn't registered to me. They couldn't prove that I knew it was there, and I didn't know it was there. They polygraphed me, all this stuff. While I was in there, I got charged with a burglary that I did do and got sentenced on it. But while I was in the jail, I had this girlfriend, this 37-year-old girlfriend, and she said something about needing me to get out or she wasn't going to be with me anymore. And so I escaped from the Yakima County Jail.
Really?
And I go on the run. And I was a trustee and stuff, so I had
Privileges.
And so I escaped from there. I go to her apartment, and it's short-lived. Like, I'm thinking it's not that big a deal. I'll just go, I'll see her. We'll figure it out, and then I'll call the jail up and just turn myself back in. And I called them to turn myself back in because I was only 60 days away from being released.
Some new charges.
I did. It's a pretty cool story, the new charges. So they said to me on the phone, you're wanted for first-degree escape. It doesn't matter if you turn yourself in. And I'm like, well, see you when you catch me. So I come to Portland. My dad has a girlfriend who has a son who died when he was 9, and I assume his identity. I get a job working at a place called Oregon Craft and Floral, which got bought out by Michaels. And I start working, and I start doing really well because I'm terrified that I'm going to go to prison forever. And I'm doing all the things I'm supposed to do. I'm working, I'm paying my bills. The identity I assumed was over 21 when I assumed it. So I got to go to bars and play pool and hang out. I've never been a drinker. So I was the guy who would drink half of a drink and it would melt and the ice would melt and I'd be shooting pool. I wouldn't even finish the drink. That didn't seem to be problematic for me. But then my dad got into a fight with his girlfriend, and she turned me in.
Oh.
And said, hey, he's using this name and all this stuff. And they show up at my place of work and arrest me. They tried to arrest my stepdad because they thought it was him, because all they knew is I was in this blue truck. And so I go to jail here in Portland, and I'm fighting extradition because I don't want to go back there. And the state of Washington basically drops the charges against me and just says, just don't come back to Washington for 10 years.
Wow.
So don't come back to Washington. You stay gone.
Really?
We're going to let it go. I had all these letters from all these different people that, hey, said John's a good guy. He's doing this. Of course, they thought my name was Robert Hastings, but my name is John. I had a driver's license, all that stuff. And I got out, and okay, now I'm good. And so the 37-year-old that I was dating at the time, she came down here, moved in here, and then I discovered crack, like pre-rocked crack cocaine, and started doing that.
I was pretty good at rocking it up because I didn't like it.
Yeah, me too. When I was in Yakima, but that's all we knew. I didn't even know that this pre-rocked crack existed. And of course, they do it with baking soda here, and I did it with ammonia, and I did it in the microwave. And
I only know how to do it with baking soda.
yeah,
I just realized something. This is a little, but I think when I first set up our appointments, I used Robert.
You did.
I had no idea. You were. I felt the email was a little terse, but I was like, okay, I apologize. I had no idea that was
Your alias.
your alias.
One of the many.
Wow, now I get it. It all clicked for me just now. Oh, I'm so sorry I did that. It was totally accidental.
and Quinky Dinkle, right? Like I'm here in Portland. I'm 18 years old. Now I can't go to bars. I don't have a driver's license anymore. All of a sudden I lose all that.
Sucks.
Because all the stuff I had was in his name.
Especially when you were doing good.
Right.
Dad.
Yeah. And me and her are, doing our thing. I am on probation. Part of the thing was they transferred my probation. They said I still had to finish my probation, but they transferred it here to Oregon on an interstate compact. And
It's a pretty sweet deal.
it was. I thought, well, amazing. Yeah, this is great. I love this. And so I stay here in Portland, live with my mom, go back to work at the same place I was working before. And then my girlfriend moves down, and she's living with me, and my PO decides that she doesn't like her and tells me I can't be in the same house with her. And so, of course, I violate my probation. They put me in jail for 60 days. And I get out, and all this time I'm doing crack. I'm doing life the best way I know how. I'm fixing cars and doing stuff and trying to make my way. I'm doing less crime because I think I just dodged a bullet. So I get out of jail and I get home back to the same girlfriend, and she doesn't realize I'm getting out because they had this matrix.
Yeah.
And they matrix me out.
You didn't have enough points yet to stay.
And so I showed back up home, and I went to go to my mom's house to let my mom know I was out. And when I got back to the house, there was written on the refrigerator in lipstick, "I love you, but I can't take it. I'm gone." I've never seen her since.
Wow.
Yeah, so just a lot of abandonment issues in my life, things like that. And then I went on I started binge using crack. I would build everything up. I would start working. I would have a job. I had a girlfriend, and I ended up moving back in with my mom, but I still had this house that the one that left had, and there was a girl across the street who lived in the basement of the neighbor's house, and me and her talked, and I'm like, "Hey, you can afford to pay the rent at this place." We made these arrangements, and we moved in together, not as a couple, just as friends. Of course, that didn't last long. A couple days later, we were now a couple, and we lived together, and then we ended up moving into another house together. But I'm binge using crack. It's so bad because, like, I would get all this cool stuff. I would go 5-6 months without using it, and then I would go get a $20 rock.
Yeah.
Just go get a $20 rock, and the next thing I am back to the same place I was before, to the point where I'm walking down the street with no shoes on because I traded those for the crack. Right, like I was. It wasn't pretty at all.
Right.
And so crack was just like this thing that just had a hold of me that I couldn't quite let go. And so on one of those rampages, I ran into a person who did meth. So by now I'm 25. I've been arrested numerous times, cars impounded, all this stuff. I'm not really like this hardened criminal type person. I'm just like a creative, right? And but I'm burglarizing the neighbor's house, those kinds of things, just being a dirtbag, right? Fake IDs. I had a connection with a guy who made birth certificates, and I do a little work for him. He'd give me a new birth certificate. I've had driver's licenses in 5 different names from the DMV. And so just committing all these petty crimes, I call them petty crimes, they were felonies, on a pretty continuous basis. And I meet this girl on one of these rampage nights, and she asked me why, because I started selling meth to pay for my crack. And she asked me why, and I said, because I don't get the rush off meth. And she goes, "Have you ever shot it?"
Exactly.
And I said, "No, I'm terrified of needles." And so she said, "Let me try." And she was a good looking girl and powers of persuasion. And so I let her, and the first shot she gave me didn't do anything. And she goes, it was like 10 cents. And then the next shot was 40 cents. And
10 to 40.
it was the same experience I had when I was like younger with the crack as with the meth. And all of a sudden now I'm like, as fuck, but I'm also, my brain is racing. I want to do things. So meth didn't give me any paranoia. I was the front door open, music cranked, driving down the street with the windows down. Like I was not the paranoid guy, at least for the first, couple of days. And then I got to the paranoia, and then I got to the craziness. And so I started shooting meth up to 100 units at a time. I couldn't get any more in the needle type, and just taking a hit of dope, and then coming to some other part of town, driving a car. I had no idea where I got it from. And through all of this, I did some weed farming. I used to grow weed, and I did chop shop stuff, and I'm just committing crimes just by habit. And
stunned on the 100 units.
Oh yeah.
Okay, drug user. You thank God it was meth back then, because
I went to prison a couple times during this, and it's interesting because my current wife, who my crime partner and using buddy, we've been just celebrated 26 years of marriage.
Shut the hell up.
She's told me, and still tells me, she goes, there's a couple of times that you've done the shots of dope, and you've just never been the same. Like it just changed probably the chemical structure of my brain. I don't know. But she goes, you've never been the same since this time. And there's like these, I had a buddy of mine who could do the biggest hit, right? The thickest. It was just, that was everything, right? And doing crimes and walking the streets of Portland. I walked from one end of Portland to the other, just committing crimes and jockey boxing people's cars and stealing cars and stuff. And one of my last sets of crimes was doing identity theft. And so I know that's the big one that people go, oh my God, that's because it terrorized people's lives, right? And you don't know.
You don't realize it
how it's affecting
later.
people,
What you do when you're high is so different. I'm not promiscuous in my personal life at all.
Yeah.
And I went to prison over an escort service. What you will do high is not what you will do sober. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And And that's the thing, is that I think that one of the things I discovered in my early recovery was that I was living based on the morals and values that I was taught, not the morals and values that I had. And because I didn't know what my morals and values were, because I never really explored them. That's something that I've noticed with most people, that we always assimilate the morals and values that we're taught, right? The family that we're from, that kind of stuff. And
Right.
because of the way my life was, I don't have any lifelong friends. I don't have any friends that I went to grade school with, that kind of stuff. My wife does. She's like, oh yeah, I went to school with them. And I'm like, yeah, like.
You're the only other person I've ever met that's had a polygraph test but me. I'm not joking. When you said that, I was like,
I've had 2.
I've had 3. It was part of my parole.
Yeah.
So because of my crime, it's not one you can see.
Right.
It's so undercover that I had to give that in my bank statements. But it's a different experience.
It
I
is.
think people don't know. You can't lie.
You can't.
You can?
Yeah.
Oh, I couldn't.
I passed one of them. I was lying through my teeth about stealing this car. And the guy told me at the end, he goes, oh, you better never take a polygraph when you're lying, because you're a great subject. And I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, great. But at that time in my life, everything that came out of my mouth was a lie.
So it was just natural.
It was just natural. And I can't remember where I was in my story. Started doing meth, ended up separating from the girl that I had at the time, and just really went off the deep end of committing crimes, because on meth, like, I could stay up, and it was just committing 10, 15 felonies a day. And
Wow.
in total, I think I've been arrested 118 times in my life.
Fuck.
I've been charged with so many felonies that I can't even count them. I've been convicted of 47 of them. Total time incarcerated from the time I was 9 to the time that I did my last sentence in 2005. 14 and a half years that I spent in and out doing life on the installment plan. Every
Right.
Sometimes I'd stay out for a year. My mom always said, oh, you had the 6-month marker, right? Every time I got out, I did good for 6 months, and then I go back to it, right? Just couldn't figure it out.
They say that when you go to prison, 1 is going to learn the first time. 2, it'll take 2 times, and the rest will do life on the installment plan.
And I was doing it, and I just in and out. And in 1995, I went to prison, and I went to treatment for the first time. And so it was a place called Turning Point at Columbia River Correctional Institution. And that was my first inkling that I didn't want to be an addict anymore. I didn't want to be a criminal anymore. And I made a commitment that I was going to get out of there. I was going to do something different. I got a lot of treatment stuff. Some people would have called me a treatment trooper at the time. And the problem with that is that it wasn't real. It was me trying to do something. I wasn't being me, right? I didn't let the people see there at the treatment facility the problems that I had. I wore the chameleon mask and just did what they told me to do so I could get my good time and get out. But it planted the seed. And I got out, and that was January 17th, 1997. I got out, and I went to live with my sister, and I was laying on my bed, and I wanted to get loaded so bad. I didn't know I had some treatment knowledge in my head. I went to a place called the URS Club. 78th and Stark.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
By my house.
yeah, and I was supposed to be going there to go to a meeting. I talked to my sister into letting me go, taking me there. And so I show up there, and it's supposed to be a meeting. There's this big dance going on. And so I go sit in the back of the room because I don't know anybody. I don't know anything. And Carrie, my wife, walks in and walks by me. And I'm like, hey, just want to let you know you got a nice ass.
Wow.
First thing I ever said to her. We still laugh about it. And we danced and we had fun. And she asked me if she had her nieces and nephew, I think just her nieces were there, and wanted to know if I would vouch for them so she could take off and go run an errand, which was to go next door and have a drink. Because she was not in recovery at the time. And then she came back and we talked until wee hours in the morning. And then she had to go run another errand, which was to go meet some of my old crime partners to make a drug deal that I didn't know. She didn't tell me. And then less than a week later, we were living together. And
you're not one for these long dating relationships.
No. And the interesting thing is that I was staying clean. I had been to treatment. I'm trying to do this thing, and I got a whole head full of this treatment, and I move in with her, and I'm spewing all my treatment stuff to all the people who come over to her house and talking. I mean, I had one guy talk him into flushing his drugs down the toilet. It was pretty funny. But about 6 months into it, I say to her, I said, I think I'm going to get loaded. And she was snorting it and smoking it, and I didn't want any part of that. I just wanted to shoot it. And
I understand.
we're walking back from the AM/PM over there, crossing through Lens Park, and I look at her and I said, I think I'm going to get loaded. And she goes, okay. And I said, I just want to let you know that I get a little sick and twisted when I get loaded. And she looks at me and smiles and says, good. Match made in heaven, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I start getting loaded, and all of a sudden it turns back into the same crime spree, doing burglaries and stealing cars and writing bad checks and all that stuff. And her and I are doing battle multiple times, a lot of domestic violence between her and I. But of course, short-lived. A few months later, I'm back in prison. And so I think that time was for a bunch of UMVs. And then she waits for me. I should say this, before I go to prison, she gets pregnant. We get married. You know, I always joke around and say that she made me marry her because she's like, when are we getting married? So we met January 17th of 97 and we got married August 21st of 1997. Yeah, so I've loved her since I think day one, and she says the same thing about me. And so we started doing crime together. We're using together. It's an amazing love affair and a crazy battle for years, right? And I go to prison for a year. It's pretty hectic. I get out. When I'm in prison for the year, I'm going to treatment again. They send me straight to treatment, like Powder River Correctional Facility. And so
Powder River?
It's in Baker City, Oregon.
Never heard of it, and I thought I was an expert.
Yeah, and so I go there, and all these times I go to treatment, it's all before the whole alternative incarceration program started, the AIP program started. So I never got these big giant time cuts like all these other guys were getting.
I went to boot camp.
Yeah, Shutter Creek, yeah. And
I was the second platoon.
yeah. And I never got to go there. Thank goodness, maybe.
You know why? Because it's for first-time offenders, yeah.
And so I go to treatment again, and now I got the spark again. I'm like, okay, I want to do this. And I get out, and I move into an Oxford house, and it's not very long before I got the whole house spun out, and I'm the president of the Oxford house. We're running the Oxford house's bank account. These are places I work with today, like when this gets out, they're gonna be like, "What? Are you sure you're going to work with him?" And I just cry. It's just when I get high, hide your shit, hide all your stuff. You don't want to let me in. My mom would let me in. She wouldn't give me a key to her house. And she was very cautious when I did come over because I would steal from my mom. I would steal from my kids. I would steal from everybody. It didn't matter. There was nobody. I didn't discriminate. And as long as I could get high, that was the thing. I tried doing crime without getting high. I tried getting high without doing crime. I tried all these different ways.
It was the mix of the two.
The two. And I've had several clean dates. Went to treatment in 95 the first time. And I get out of Powder River and I'm thinking I'm going to do this. Got the Oxford. And it's really interesting. The story of how I got loaded that time was really, I got to say, with my faith, that I just believe Satan was out to get me. Like, I'm walking out of it. Me and the wife are living in an Oxford house. She's living in another location, and we're at a plaid pantry together on our way back to the Oxford house. We just went up there to get a soda or something, and the lady follows me out the door and she says, "Hey, you dropped this," and it's an 8-ball of cocaine. And my first thought is, oh, we can sell it, right? We're not making
that would have been my first thought too.
A bunch of money. But by the end of the night, it was gone, right? And we got loaded, and then it spun. And of course, it was cocaine. So then I was like, oh, I never really got high off that. If we're going to do it, let's do it right. And I called one of my old dealers who refused to sell to me. And I'm like, hey, I got this thing. I had to lie to him and tell him how I could make some money off of it because he was happy that I was doing good. And it was on, right? And so we move out of there and into a little house, and out of the Oxford house into a little house. And we're like, we can do drugs. We just can't do them in the house, right? And as we're doing the interview for the house, there's a half ounce of dope in the car melting because it's so hot outside. And it's just always this commitment, always this, I'm going to do something different, and then never really knowing how. And I had this real visceral reaction to Narcotics Anonymous. People were like AA, NA, those kind of things. That was just a place where people went and cried about what they were going through. I didn't need to do that. I'm sure that a lot of that came from my upbringing, that we deal with our own stuff. We don't put that out in the world.
My first NA meeting, there was someone high there.
Yeah.
And I was like, fuck this. Seriously.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't want to be here. And it made me really uncomfortable.
Yeah. So we get into this house, and it goes real sideways. By the time we leave that house, which we got evicted, every window in the house was broken out. We had got to a point where we couldn't afford anything. We were beat down. And I don't want to make it sound like it was all bad, because I had some good times. We were balling this time, that time, this time, that time. But then it was always temporary, right? It was always temporary. And it's in that house. And by the time I remember one time, my wife and I were so strung out, and things were so bad that we got 2 packages of Top Ramen and 1 seasoning packet. And we're fighting over who gets the seasoning packet, right? And we didn't have the ability to think, let's just put both packages in one pan and add the seasoning packet, and we'll be able to share it. Like, it's not that difficult. But when you're in that state of mind.
Yeah.
It is.
It's so, you just can't think straight. You can't figure it out. And that's where I was at. And we're doing this thing. We end up not having a place to live, and we're bouncing from place to place. We finally end up getting another apartment. I start doing some pretty hefty crimes for dollar money, and still not enough. And then I start running a little business, a little identity theft business. And I get pretty good at printing money, making IDs, things like that. And we have a pretty good run for a while. And then I end up back in prison again. And so 95 was the first time that I got treatment. And that was the first time I thought about, hey, I want to do something different. This is 2005. And I'm walking down the tier at OSP on C Block. And I'm carrying my blankets. And I got my flip-flops on the blankets. And I remember walking past the cell I had been in almost 10 years earlier. And my cell number was 235, and I remember it still today. And it hitting me. It was my very first aha moment. Was it's been 10 years, and
You're back.
I'm back. I haven't done anything with my life, and I couldn't blame anybody but myself. So all of a sudden, the gift of accountability came to me, right? And that was like the most amazing thing. And I made a commitment in that moment that I was never coming back. I was never going to give these people one more day of my life. And yeah, and I had just been convicted on August 3rd of 2005. I had been convicted of my last felony, and I got real lucky. When I went in front of the judge, the DA was asking for 156 months. And the judge pulled me back into her chambers, and I've sentenced you so many times. You've been in front of me so many times for so many different things. What's going to work for you? And I told her that I think getting out with 3 years of a tail, doing a couple of years, and I'm begging for a couple of years. And,
Right.
And so that's what she ends up doing. She gives me 26 months. It looks like 156 months on paper because it's consecutive and concurrent and all this difference. The way she worked it really
I
well.
understand consecutive and concurrent.
And the funny thing is I was already doing a 26-month sentence when I got convicted of the crime on August 3rd. And so it extended my sentence another 6 months. So I really only got 6 months, which was like,
God is good.
which was another chance. Right?
Yeah.
Like you think about the name of this place. And I remember her telling me that she was going to give me a chance. She was going to give me an opportunity. And she's
Do you
like,
know this judge's name?
I don't know it off the top of my head, but I sent her my 10-year coin.
I was going to say.
And she was retired by that time and was very happy to hear from me because she'd probably given a lot of people a chance, but I don't know how many followed up with her and said, it worked. It worked. And so I do my 26 months, and the whole time my wife's out here struggling, living in a shelter. Things are not great. She can't visit me because she's my co-defendant on some of the charges. So it's a rough thing. My mom basically stopped helping me out. Doing it, the last sentence I did was a lot tougher than any of the other time I had ever done because I had this aha moment. Now, before that, this is where I was meant to be. I knew this is where I was going to end up. This was like I knew I was going to be in prison. Everybody who knew me knew I was going to be in prison at some time. And when I first got to prison, the very first time, I thought, hey, I've arrived, right? All my buddies are here, people that I've run with, people that didn't even know me, who knew of me. And so this time it was a little different because now I'm trying to do something different, right? And so then I had to learn how to do something different, right? Okay, I made the commitment. Now what do I do? So I started reading. I started reading self-help books. I petitioned to go to treatment one more time at Turning Point. They turned me down. I petitioned them again, said, hey, I really need to figure out how to do this. And they say, okay, we're not going to give you any time off for it, but you can come here and do treatment if you want. And this time when I go to treatment, I decide I'm just going to be me. I'm going to act out in the behaviors that I normally do, and I'm not going to
front.
I'm not going to front. And so what that gave me the opportunity to do was to actually see my defects of character, to see the thinking errors that I had, the tactics that I used to avoid accountability, and allowed me to be a part of my own recovery.
And learning the thinking errors, I did that too, helps you identify them so that you can change them.
Right.
And I know that uniqueness, I think I'm unique as fuck. And still sometimes addicts are self-willed, self-centered, but yeah.
Yeah. And I start learning this stuff about myself. I start journaling and I start doing some of the things they tell me to do, and I'm doing it for real. I had to write a one-page paper every day for 30 days on how standing on the corner can lead to relapse. And so I thought it was the dumbest thing. What the hell? And it was one of the best lessons I ever did because it taught me that no matter where I was, if I was hanging out somewhere, just hanging out on the corner,
it's not good.
It's a metaphor, right? It's hanging out with anywhere that you shouldn't be, like just putting yourself at risk. I learned that, and so part of the reason why I think I stayed clean the last time I got out August 3rd, 2005 is my clean date. Not because that's the last time I used. February 1st is actually the last time I got loaded of the same year. But August 3rd was when I got convicted. I'm like, I haven't tried this yet. I got to do something different. So I tried that, and I get out and I'm doing something different. I've learned these things about myself. I'm journaling. I'm talking about where I want to be in 5 years. I carry this little card in my wallet that says, what's the worst thing that can happen to you if you get loaded today? What's the best thing that can happen to you if you stay clean? And I had to look at that thing so many times because I'm still not buying into the NA thing, right? I'm living in an Oxford house. I made a commitment to stay in an Oxford house for a year. My wife hated it. She's like, why don't we just get a place together? Of course, she's still using.
That's why.
And in her DOC, her main DOC is alcohol. And so we finally, a year goes by, and I'm in this Oxford house, and I'm doing really well. I'm going to meetings whenever they drag me to the meetings. I moved into this Oxford. I had nothing when I got out of prison. The Oxford house said, we'll take you. I interviewed them from inside the prison. They said, we'll take you. You can come here, stay here for a week. If you get a job within the first week, you can stay. But every morning when they left to go to work, I had to leave. I didn't get a key. And I was lucky enough to have some skills. I'd painted cars and done body work and stuff like that since I was 16. And so I got a job working for a place called Bushwhackers that makes these fender flares for new cars and stuff. And I got a job there and started working. And the Salvation Army paid for our first move-in rent and deposits. It was really interesting because, of course, with my track record with getting evicted and never doing any landlord that I ever had right, I applied for this apartment, this house. And the guy who owned the house was a bail bondsman. And I said, before I even put an application, I always tell him, look, I have an extensive criminal history. And he says to me, as long as you don't have any drug charges, I'll rent to you. And I'm like, great, I don't have any drug charges. No drug charges, right, on my record.
I have none either.
That's because I had so many other crimes when they caught me with drugs. The drugs didn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, every time I got arrested, I got 15, 14, 16 charges. And so he calls me back and says, I can't rent to you. He goes, I got this huge rap sheet, right? And I only been out for a year. And I said, can we make it work? And he goes, you know what? You pay me double the deposit to move in. And the Salvation Army paid double the deposit to move us in. Wow. And I had a job, and so the sustainability was there. And the wife had a job, and she went to work for a place called Impact Northwest through a program that helped her get employed, and they paid half her wages for a while. And she ended up working at that job for 15 years. And life was started to change around. And so we moved into this house, and we're there, and she's still using. And unbeknownst to me, she's now has a opioid addiction, and she's getting painkillers from her doctor because she has this knee pain. But it makes her act the same way she does when she's drinking, and she's not a nice person when she's drinking. And so we get very mean. And one night, her and I get into a big argument, and I just happen to have $900 cash in my pocket, and this is the second aha moment for me. And I end up down on Interstate Avenue with $900 in my pocket, and I took the bus there. I didn't plan on going there, but that's where I ended up. And I was just trying to get away from her so that I didn't go to jail for domestic violence or her go to jail. And walking down Interstate, and some guy says, hey, looking for something? And my answer was, what do you got? And so
You were hanging out.
I was hanging out on the corner.
Right. That's exactly what I was thinking.
And of course, I'm not doing NA or anything like that at the time. I do have the couple of support guys from the Oxford house that I lived in with, and I tried to call them. None of them answered. There's only 3 or 4 of them. And I get into the hotel room. He says, I got some crack. So now we're back to crack again. So I'm like, well, yeah, that'll work. I'll take $100 worth, right? And we get in the hotel room, and he's over in the bathroom getting it out of the medicine cabinet where we had it stashed. And he says, I don't have $100 worth, but I can have a guy come and bring some. And I'm looking at him, and I'm looking down on his bed, and there's 3 orange NA key tags on this guy's bed in the form of a triangle. And I look at the key tags, and I'm looking at him, and I'm looking at the key tags, and I'm looking at him. And I put the $100 back in my pocket, and I take $10 out, and I'm like, he comes up to give me the crack, and I give him $10. So I said, I'm not ready to give up yet.
Wow, that's powerful.
And in that moment, I realized I needed help. I couldn't do it on my own. So I made a commitment to myself in that moment that, you know what, I'm going to go try this NA thing, okay? I'll give it 1 year. I'll do whatever they say for 1 year. Because I know if I did that crack, my next stop is the penitentiary, because that's where it always ended up. And so I'm leaving the hotel room, and the guy's following me down the street, and I'm like, the guy's following me. I finally turn around and tell him, if you take one more step to follow me, I'm going to beat the F out of you. And of course, he stopped following me. And so the next day, I hit the nooner on 60th and Prescott. And in that same meeting, I got a sponsor and I got a support person. And over the next year, my whole freaking life changed. And it's like early 2009. I'm coming up on 3 years since my last conviction. I've never taken a key tag, never gotten anything like that. And so my first key tag was a multiple year key tag in Narcotics Anonymous. Of course, since then I
noticed
you see
right
my
when
little
I
ring
came
there.
in.
I went back and got them all. Just because,
As you should.
yeah.
I love that image of the three on the bed in a triangle.
Me
Talk
too.
about
Yeah.
somebody giving you a sign like,
Spiritual
hello.
sign.
And in retrospect, I've thought about it a lot of times. What
What are the chances?
What did he have to go through to get 3 30-day key tags? Because he wasn't clean when I was talking to him.
And what did he give up?
And what did he give up? And then sometimes I'm like, were they even really there?
They
Come
were.
on. So there's all these, but it was a sign, and it was a sign that pushed me in the right direction. And at that time, my higher power I knew there was a higher power. I knew that there was something out there. I just didn't know what it was.
My story.
And so I go to this meeting. I get a support group. They just happen to be starting up a brand new meeting called Old Values, New Era. It's going to meet the first time this next Tuesday, and I'm invited. And so I started going to that meeting, and it was a men's meeting. And I started going to that meeting, and I started developing relationships with friends and connections and people I could call and talk about the struggles. And I think our second meeting, Carrie, my wife, she doesn't believe I'm going to meetings. She doesn't believe I'm doing anything I'm supposed to be doing because she's in her addiction, and we have a lot of history. I was not a great husband for a very long time. I was a drug addict, and she wasn't a great wife either. And so we hurt each other a lot. And I remember going to the meeting and driving to the meeting in her car, and her showing up at the meeting, stomping into the meeting, and like, how dare you steal my car? Like making this big scene, but realizing I think at that time that's really where I was, and this is what I was doing. We were meeting in a little coffee shop, and so I'm still working at the same place, and then the recession came, and I got laid off from my job, and somebody from the meeting said, I think you'd make a great counselor. I'm like, okay, I'll try and go back to school. And so I go to school, and there's a competition to get into the CADC program, the addiction program over at PCC, and you get these points, and then your name goes into a hat, and they draw your name and all this stuff. And I didn't think I was going to get in, and I got on my knees one day and said, if this is what you want me to do, then give me a sign. Literally the next day, my award letter for my financial aid came through, and the acceptance letter to get into the program came through.
Well, there's your
Somebody's
sign.
you got someone's attention.
Oh, I think he had a purpose for me, right?
Yeah.
And
That's awesome.
And I've always had I was a hustler, right? My mouth could get me out of almost any jam I was in. And so I learned how to talk, and I learned how to communicate, and I learned how to manipulate. And those were great skills that I had. My mom used to say you could sell ice cubes to Eskimos if you had to. And hopefully that's not a racist thing. But I go to school, and I'm terrified to go to school because you guys heard my story about schools.
Yeah.
Never been good. And I go to school, and I give my all. And first term, I get straight A's. That terrified me worse than getting straight F's, because now okay, you can do it. Expectations just went up. And so I'm in this program at PCC, and I'm doing the thing, and I finally get my internship, and I'm part of my step work with my sponsor. I've worked the steps probably 5 or 6 times formally, and I work them every day in my life now. I had a lot of wreckage, credit card companies, banks, things like that, places where you can't really go and make amends. And so my 9th step included volunteering at the Oregon Food Bank for 6 months, and then volunteering for some kind of place that helps people. And so I went to do volunteer work every Saturday for a year at the Volunteers VOA for Men, so the MRC and so that really solidified my, like, oh, I really want to do this. I want to work with these people, right?
Right.
And so then I did my internship at Quest, and
I was just going to ask, where did you do your
yeah, and so
internship?
it was pretty amazing. I did 40 hours a week for 8 months at Quest. Like I was basically a full-time counselor. And the interesting thing is I went to school, and I did really good in school, and math was my hardest subject because I actually had to study for it. The rest of it came pretty easy. And at Quest, I learned about all kinds of really cool stuff. But the first day there, I was an intern, and their staff member didn't show up to run a group, and they're like, here, you run a group. Go do it. I've been to treatment 3 times, right? Residential treatment 3 times for a year each time. So I knew what group.
You were natural.
I know what group was, right? I know how to do this. Like, I just pretend to be one of those people that stood in front of me, and it turned out I was pretty good at it. And I did.
Authentic.
Yeah.
You know?
And so the one thing that happened for me when I was in school was there was this shift that happened for me around my integrity. And I went from being to lying about everything to being honest about everything. Part of that rigorous honesty of the program. And it was painful, super painful to become rigorously honest, because I had to tell them when I made a mistake, I had to tell on myself.
Was there, just curious, I was honest too, but I had a lot of shame around it for a while.
Me too. Until I learned that I needed to shift the blame, right? So I don't blame myself for being an addict. You hear it all the time. You're not responsible for your addiction. You are responsible for your recovery. And so
I love that. I've never heard that.
And so I figured out that it wasn't none of that stuff that I did, none of those things those weren't me, right? I was acting against my own morals, values, and beliefs, because when I finally figured out what my morals, values, and beliefs, which didn't occur until I was 3 or 4 years clean, actually 4 or 5 years clean, because I worked the steps and realized, oh, this stuff, like everybody has done this stuff. People that are in recovery have been down this road. I'm not unique. I'm not the only criminal out there. I'm not the only liar out there. I'm not the only, all these things that I wasn't even those things anymore. I was John Morgan, right? I was a little kid who didn't know. I started using when I was 9. I was basically this adult that had the brain of a 9-year-old, right? And I had to learn everything all over again. And the thing I learned was I just need to take accountability, right? Just be accountable. You can make mistakes. Just be accountable for them. Own that stuff. And I learned that owning it made me do less mistakes.
Oh, hell yeah.
Because I hated owning it. And so I'm going to these meetings. I'm going to school. I'm doing an internship. And I get my first job at DePaul Treatment Center as an on-call counselor.
Shut the fuck up downtown?
Mm-hmm.
13th?
Yeah. And so I go on there as an on-call counselor, and 5 or 6 days after I get hired, they're like, do you want a part-time job? And I'm like, sure. And so I've been doing this for about 8 months, maybe close to a year. I'm just getting my very first certification as an addiction counselor. And they're like, okay, here's a caseload of 35. Every one of the people on my caseload was sentenced to treatment by the Department of Community Justice. They were all my people.
Yeah.
And I started teaching them out of the book right up there called Criminal Conduct and Substance Use Treatment. I started teaching them out of the same book that I learned my recovery out of. And so full circle, right?
Yeah.
And in the first year that I was a counselor, I had a 56% completion rate. 56% of the people who came to see me.
Which is a miracle.
Which is crazy. I got awards for it. Like I still have one. I think it's over there on the shelf or something. Because I learned, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but I'm not really a counselor. I'm just John. And I know all these different techniques and these interventions, but I talk to people, they're humans, they're me, right? And I don't have any judgment for them. I know the suffering that they're going through because I went through it, and I went through it pretty viciously. And I've left a lot of my story out. I was not a nice guy. I did some pretty mean stuff. I would steal your grandma's purse, right? With her last bit of food money in it, if it meant that I was going to come up, right?
Right.
And I'm doing this stuff at DePaul, and all of a sudden it turns out I'm pretty good at it. And all of a sudden they're like, you want to run the whole program? So within 3 years of getting my CADC, I got my CADC2, and they put me in charge of the whole outpatient department at DePaul. And so I become the program manager there, and I'm running 3 different locations, and I'm learning all this really great stuff about business and about how it works and how it doesn't work. And I'm there for 5 years. And it got to a point there where the caseloads were 50 to 70 patients per clinician.
That's too much.
And it is. And so I realized they're giving them the best treatment they know how to the people, but it's not working. I'm seeing it not work, especially since now I'm not a counselor anymore. I'm the program director. I'm not in the room with the patient. I'm not able to really
Do the one-on-one.
The one-on-one, that creating the interventions, talking to them. I remember one of my counselors coming to me after a patient relapsed after having like 65 days. And like, why would they do that? Of course, they weren't in recovery. And I'm like, what do you mean why? This is a disease. It's coming for you. Even when it doesn't look like it's coming for you, it's coming for you. And so I tell them, I'm like, I don't want to be the program manager anymore. I just want to go back to being a counselor. I post a job listing for my position. They asked me to help hire the person to replace me, and they're going to move me back to being a counselor. And somebody sees that post in the community and says, hey, if you just want to be a counselor, we want you to come work for us. And so I go to work for this startup treatment center, and I go in there as just a counselor, and within a year, I'm the interim executive director, clinical director. And so that place had some issues. And so then I got asked to help build a treatment center from the ground up, and I went and did that. And I tell people all the time, like, I love 80% of what most places are doing. I needed to come here and build this to do the other 20%. And so this has been a dream of mine for a very long time, is to build another chance, because I think everybody deserves another chance. That's our logo. You deserve another chance, right? Because you do. If you're listening to this and you're struggling, you deserve another chance, right?
Yeah.
Glad I got another chance.
Me too. That judge, that day in the motel, those were all chances, right? And being arrested 118 times, those are all chances, right? It's not a second chance. It's not a third chance, it's another chance, right? As long as you're breathing and you have the ability to show up for yourself and do something different, you get another chance, right? I do joke with some people sometimes, you do deserve another chance. It's just not here because they've done something that's difficult. And I've actually had to say that to my wife. Me and her separated for 6 months at one point in time, which sparked her recovery. She's coming up on 6 years now, and I just celebrated 19. So that's a miracle in itself. Like that, it doesn't happen, especially if you had the story of what we went through, restraining orders, like things like that. Restraining orders on her, restraining orders on me. Like it was crazy, and yet we've never been happier in our lives. Like we are the most amazing couple. We have such huge trust for each other, the lessons we've learned, and who we are today. But this place really started when I was working at DePaul, and me and a bunch of the counselors are like, we need to do something different. We need to do something better. And it never came to fruition there, but I was on a stumble booth on a kind of a men's retreat. Everybody there was in the program and in recovery, and we had been snowmobiling all day. And I was talking, we were playing poker in the evening, and I was talking to one of the guys about buying a truck from him. And I said, no, I can't buy the truck. I need to come up with $100,000 to open a new treatment center. And he looks at me and says, okay, I'll give you $100,000. And I'm like, are you serious?
What's his name?
And I'm like, are you serious? And he said, yeah. And I'm like, and I went to bed that night with absolutely no fear because I was trying to come up with the money. And I had another guy who wanted to invest $150,000. It takes about $300,000 to open a place like this. And he said that. And then the guy that had committed the 150 backed out, and the guy that offered the 100 said, I got another guy who's interested. And so they, came up with the money and said, what do you need? And I presented an idea to them, and they said, yeah, like we'll support you for a year. They didn't even set a dollar limit on it. They just said, we'll make sure there's $50,000 in your bank account on the first of every month for the next year until you don't need it. One of the two. We started doing this, and I quit my job, and I owned a part of the last treatment center, and I quit there. I told them everything that I thought was wrong with the place and walked off and started this place. And within 6 months, we had patients, and we were doing well, and we were paying the bills. And these guys that supported me in doing this, I'll say they're for Sean and AJ, like they're some of the most amazing partners I've ever had because they let me do what I needed to do it, right? They didn't tie my hands. They didn't try and micromanage it. And they trusted me, and I trust them. And this whole place exists on a handshake.
That's incredible.
No attorneys involved, no nothing.
Stop making me cry.
We shook hands and said, let's do this. And we opened a bank account, and they gave me a checkbook and deposited $50,000. And this is for a guy who has committed so much fraud and committed so many crimes. And they knew me. They knew that this was part of my story. They'd also seen my work in the community. And so they took a huge chance. And then when it came to open the second location, we talked about getting them paid back for the money they invested. And they're like, yeah, don't worry about it. If we ever sell the business, then we'll get it back then. So there's no debt here. We don't owe any money. We have a van we make payments on. This place, it's been easy. And it's been easy because God made all of this happen.
You've done the work too, John. I'm just saying. He made it possible. I agree.
He had to do the work. He had to do the work on me. Like he had to run me
agree.
He had to run me through the ringer. He had to send me to my room 4 times. That's what the penitentiary. That was God sending me to my bedroom. You're grounded, and it saved my life because
And think of all the lives you saved, because I know some of them. One of my guys in my meeting, I didn't know he was here. Last night we were in a meeting together, and he said he's back in treatment. He had gotten a year, and he went out. And I saw him this morning. He blew me a kiss from your room downstairs, and I'm like so glad he's here.
Yeah.
Because he did it for a year and a month, and I know he has it in him,
But the thing is, I'm not doing it, right? Like nobody could do it for me. The only thing that Another Chance does is gives them a safe place to figure it out if they want to. And so that's the gift of Another Chance, is that we don't turn anybody away.
just remarkable.
We help no wrong door, right? This is a no wrong door.
Peter says that all the time, just so you know.
If you need help, you need support, we have an imaginary line going out the front door because our patients are bringing people here. We don't punish people for being addicts. We give them a safe place.
That maybe segues into what I was wondering. You had been to several others, and you said there were 80% there, and you wanted to do this. You had 20% to make it what you wanted, what you envisioned. So talk me through that. What was missing, or what is it that you do different? What's that 20% that makes it such a big success?
Well, I mean, basically, we don't punish them, right? They relapse. It's not, why the F did you do that? Or you're not working your program, it's like, what's missing? How can we help you figure out? Like, it's,
don't give up.
It's real trauma-informed, patient-centered care. Like, we're meeting them where they're at. It doesn't mean that we co-sign everything that they do, but we talk about what are the interventions that we can provide you that are going to help you figure out what you need to do in order to stay on the path that you want to be on. So the 3 questions we ask people when they get here is, how did you get here? Where do you want to be? And how can we help?
It's kind of when you said meet you there.
Yeah.
I know in the peer support, they meet them there, do no harm.
Right.
And how can I help you?
Exactly.
If they say it over and over again, meet
Yeah.
them there. And they're there is different for different people.
And that's the thing is that the pivotal moment for me was on that tier at OSP when I realized I was responsible. This place gives people the ability to realize they're responsible. And they'll come to me like, I'm like, this is your recovery. I can't tell you what to do. What do you think you should do? And most of the time, probably 95% of the time,
They'll come up with it.
they'll come up with it. And just yesterday, someone was in my office like, I got this and this and that and this and that. And I'm like, so what do you need to do? They talk about it for a little bit. And I'm like, oh, sounds like you have your answer. And they're like, they get frustrated, but they do. They have the answers. They're smart. They're intelligent. Like, the world gives up on these people, and I don't.
There is so much stigma
Absolutely.
around crime, around addiction. I'll be out of prison 30 years in October, and I had a job offer,
Yeah.
$80,000. I've worked for $1 billion company, $1 million, and this isn't even that. And they rescinded their offer when they ran my background check.
Yeah.
And I literally almost pooped my pants thinking the 19 years at Sprint wasn't good enough consecutively. And then I'm in a role, and there is a lot of stigma. You didn't even give me the courtesy of asking me, where am I at?
I mean, it's going to happen.
I didn't expect it though, John. I really didn't. I'm going to tell you, my ego for a couple weeks took a hit. Yeah, I'm not joking. I was, what the fuck? How much do I have to prove myself?
I don't know that you ever can to the normie people, right? Like, the interesting thing is, and I don't know if you know this or not, and I tell people, we're scary people. Like, when you compare us to the normal people who haven't been through the things that we've been through, people who don't know me, when they meet me, they know me for 6-7 months, and then they hear a part of my story, they're like, what? It blows them away.
Mine too. Is very different.
And I was at Columbia River Correctional Institute last year. I won this amazing trophy up on the wall for my car, having it there. And I tried to get in to go to the car show this year, and they turned me down. And they won't even tell me why. And at first I was like, what do you mean? Again, I don't know. Like, the thing that's amazing about the gift of the higher power that I have, God, is that there's always these reasons that I have no clue. Maybe I'm not getting in there because on that day when they're having that car show, I'm supposed to be somewhere else so I can help the next person. I don't know. When that car's driving slow in front of me and I really want to get around them because they're one of my character defects is driving like a crazy madman still. But the thing, I don't know. I didn't know going to prison was going to be the greatest gift of my life.
Right.
I didn't know
It was the timeout I needed.
So I don't know what the gifts are. And so one of the things that I have today, which is amazing for me, I'm so peaceful and I'm so serene most of the time because I don't label things good or bad anymore.
I love that.
It just is, right? This is life. How I show up for it, that's what I'm responsible for. The rest of it is up to God.
It took me a couple weeks, but I'm a little slower, okay? It took me a couple weeks, and I figured I have a different purpose. With 27 years of recovery and 30 out of prison, there's something else. And Peter kept saying it. I will say Peter got to that conclusion.
There's a
quicker.
reason
He's
for
there
everything,
telling-
and everything
He's
has a
there
second.
telling you this is not the job for you.
Yeah.
And I was trying to just do something a little less stress. Meeting numbers for bigger companies can get, and I want to be at peace.
Yeah.
Yeah. This makes me happy, just so you know.
Yeah.
I learned so much when we do podcasts. It's almost been like therapy and processing your shit. And it took me a long time to, again, I'm slow. It took me a long time to be completely authentic. It took me almost 25 years to flip the prison thing and saying that it probably saved my life and gave me the time out I needed. But
Yeah.
it took me a minute. And it took me 25 years to admit that I was molested. I didn't want it to define me. I didn't want to talk about it. And announcing I go to a gay men's meeting, which was very safe for me, especially coming from the escort service. But announcing that you're an ex-con, an ex-escort slash prostitute, an ex-IV drug user, it was easy in a meeting. It's not. It wasn't easy for me in the business world. Until Peter and I did our first 2 podcasts, I kept the professional, polished Julie and this Julie, and just recently merged them. A long time. Like I said, I'm slow.
It's in the way things have evolved in my recovery, which is I had my home life, I had my recovery life, I had my work life, and now I have life. It's one. My business partners are part of my recovery life. They're part of my friend group. Most of the people that work here are friends, family. Most of the people who work here in recovery or have been affected by addiction in a profound way that have this passion. The mission is just to help as many people as we can, right?
You are.
And no matter what gets in the way, that mission has never been lost. We've never had to struggle paying the bills, not one time. Even when the cyber attack hit, we had enough money in the prudent reserve to pay the bills. I've never had to tell somebody we can't afford to pay your rent. We can't afford to buy you an alternator for your car because that's what you need to get to work. Like, we got patient request forms. Somebody came up to this morning and said, I have an opportunity to get an apartment. I don't have $55 for the application fee. Here's $55 for the application fee. So breaking down the barriers is essential, right? While maintaining healthy boundaries, are you invested in your treatment? Because one of the hardest things about this business is that 1,200 people have been through here. Some get clean and fumble around, and some are just working the system. I don't care. Come here, work the system. Come and work it. I've worked it for a long time before I got clean. If the seed gets planted and later on they have a safe place to come back to, great. We've hired some of our alumni, and we have 47 people in our alumni program, and it's working, right? And a lot of people get jaded in this business when patient A comes through the door and they get free rent and they get a food box and then they're back out again. That's the disease.
Yeah.
I can't hold that against the next person who comes through the door. That'd be like we do it in relationships. We bring our baggage with us. I'm not doing that. Everybody who stands in front of me is them, not the deeds of the people who came before them. Because if that was true, I would, and I always tell people life isn't fair. Thank God. Thank God life's not fair. If it was, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be still in the joint. I'd still be doing time because I did enough dirt out there. If you think I got arrested 118 times, how many times should I have been arrested?
Oh, I agree with you. If I got arrested for everything I did.
Right? It wasn't fair for that judge to let me off with that little sentence. But it worked. And I've learned that the disease is to blame for the things that I did. I'm not. So I don't have any shame and guilt around who I was, where I was. I've done crime. I've stolen from people. I've hurt people physically. I have done a lot of stuff to some of the people that I love the most. And today, I don't do that stuff. Today, I do the opposite. And this is who I am. I'm a caring, compassionate, loving person who wants to help the world.
And you're authentic.
And I want to break the treatment modality so that we stop, as people in recovery, stop perpetuating the stigma.
Yes. Yeah.
All the way to the point where when a patient comes to me and says, I got 30 days, I don't tell them I'm proud of them. That's about me. I tell them, how's that working for you? Tell me how you got there. What did you do? And what are you going to keep doing? Just like I don't tell them, oh, I'm ashamed of you if they get loaded. Like,
what are you going to do different?
What are you going to do different? What do you need to fix? How can we help? That's the whole mission here, is to help people see that they have the ability. So many people come through here. How many times I had to go to treatment to figure it out, right? And it wasn't really treatment that saved me. It was the shift. It was staying alive long enough to have the aha moment. And sometimes that's all we're doing, is providing enough time for them to realize what it is that they need to do to get their lives back. And I take no credit for them being successful, because if I did, then I got to take credit for the people who aren't successful, and I got to take credit for the people who die, because this disease is killing people.
Yeah.
Right.
Worse now than it ever has. And everybody talks about COVID being this pandemic. What about the pandemic that's happening now? You know, that these people...
Fentanyl's no joke.
It's not. And so I'm in total agreement with the new rules around 110. Go to jail or go to treatment, because you know what? The cool thing is, in jail, they're less likely to die. In treatment, they're less likely to die. And
I couldn't agree with you more.
let's give them the opportunity to do something different.
Yeah.
And statistically speaking, somebody who's forced to go to treatment has just as much chance to get it together and figure it out and get back to their life and get to where they want to be as somebody who wakes up one morning and says, I'm tired of doing this, and shows up. the outcomes are pretty similar. And so, in fact, the people who are forced to be here and have to be account to it because they have this thing hanging over their head sometimes get a little bit quicker because they're here every day. They show up every time. They don't have these gaps in their treatment because they have more accountability. And interesting, we work with parole and probation. We work with the federal justice system. We work with the public defender's office. We work with all the ADISs and all the different people. And the most amazing thing I think that we do for patients who call us is we don't ask all these questions about
What's your insurance?
What's your insurance? How are you going to pay for it? We say, when can you be here? This is our next opening. We'll figure all the rest of that stuff out later. And it has.
That's my favoriteest thing about you.
It's worked itself out just fine.
And it gives you the chance that, do you want it? Show up for your appointment. It's not about all the rest. If you want it, okay.
You know?
I love that. I got here on parole. I just came for 6 months to get off parole, right? And at the 6th month, I was scared to fuck up. So I stayed. Yeah.
The other thing I've observed is the peer mentor, the lived experience.
Yeah.
And what I admire from a lot of organizations that
We keep
we've
hearing
talked
it.
to is hiring from within. What I mean by that is people who have been in
Right.
the program, who are in recovery. Because if you're out there, who's going to understand what you're going through and who's going to see all the little tricks and things that you might be trying to, it's someone who's been there.
Yeah.
And I think that's amazing.
We've seen it. We've seen it in a lot of cases with 4D, GTD, hiring within, and changing fucking people's lives for real.
Yeah, and giving them the opportunity is the only real thing I can do. I can't make anybody get it. I can lead them to water, but I can't make them drink it. And so
I wish if I could just give it.
The interesting is that presumes that I know what their formula is. That's the toughest thing about this business is that
Everybody's formula is different.
Yeah. There's a lot of similar ones, but it's crazy how different one person's recovery looks than another's. My first 3 years, I didn't do meetings. I white knuckled it basically. And some people just have to do it their way.
Yeah, there's 3 of us in here with the same purpose. There's 3 of us in here with the same purpose, and all 3 of our stories are very different.
Yeah.
I can't see you working for an escort service, John.
What do you mean? Whoa! Don't create barriers for me. Don't create barriers for me.
I know. I'm just saying, but we both ended up in prison. You know?
And that's
Peter never had to go.
the story. Is that trauma is the first thing. We are traumatized, and trauma looks different for everybody. And I've been shot twice in the head, both times. And I don't have any trauma around guns. I don't have somebody pulls a gun out. I'm like, okay. Like other people can see me get shot or have seen people get shot and have a lot of trauma. Everybody's makeup is different. What we've gone through, where we're at, our perception of the world is different. This interview is different from you, for your perspective, than from mine, from yours to mine. So there's 3 of us in this room, and there's 3 truths in here, right? And then there's the truth. And every situation is that way. And my perception colors everything. The cool thing about the gift that God gave me is that I know that. And I don't have to assume that somebody else sees it my way. And it's okay if they don't. In fact, I recommend people who think I'm doing something different or doing it the wrong way to come tell me, because I don't freaking know. I need to know. My staff will say, I think we should do it this way. All right, let's
try it.
Let's try that.
Yeah.
And the thing about treatment is it's like flying this airplane. I've made this joke for years. It's like flying an airplane while you're building it. And we're just trying to figure it out and do the best that we can to help the people who need the help, to give them the opportunity to get back to the lives that they want. Not the lives that we want them to have, not the success that I think it is. What does success mean to them? And how can we help them get there? That is, to me, like the mission, right?
Yeah.
And because I don't get to decide. When I try and force somebody to do it my way, believe me, I know how to do it. Like I'm the authority. No, I'm not. I'm the authority on me. I'm not the authority on you.
And what worked for me doesn't mean it's going to work for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, that's how people speak in meetings and in other. How I hear people speak is not, here's what you need to do. Here's what worked for me.
Right.
Here's
Right.
what I did. And I love that. And I've actually incorporated that into everything. When someone is, how do you fix my phone? And here's what works for me. You know, that's probably to a fault, but it's true. You got to,
Yes.
the person has to have their own
Every
vision.
story is different.
I attended a meeting for a while, a men's meeting, and it was a solution-based meeting. And so the process in that meeting was that somebody would share a struggle that they were going through. And only people who had been through something like that, whether they got through it successfully or they didn't, could share their experience with that situation.
Oh, interesting.
And if you started talking about something else, you tried to introduce a new topic, or you tried to go off the rails and talk about how your day at work was, people would shut you down. Like, you share, how did you get through your wife leaving you? How did you get through losing a job? How did you get through changing from one job to another? Like, how did you get through the last relapse that you've been through? Like, how did you deal with fear? And people will talk about how they did it, not how you should do it.
I like
And
that.
so we didn't give advice. We just talked from our own experience.
Yeah.
Best meeting I ever been to.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could use some of that. Yeah. Yeah. I want to thank you
Yeah.
for messing up my makeup.
And if someone's listening and this has touched you in some way, go to our website or visit Another Chance's website. We'll have the links on our page. They'll be with this podcast. Your website has a number on there they can call, an email they can email, a button they can click. There's multiple ways to reach out.
Sure. Yeah.
If you want
Absolutely.
what we have.
And we have a couple podcasts from people from here. We've recorded here. They've been kind enough to let us. We appreciate that. We posted your picture already once before. Not your picture of the building so people know what to look for. But yeah, and you're doing good stuff.
Yeah.
It's just-
Thank you so much for taking any last.
Just if you're out there, if you're struggling, reach out. It's going to be the hardest thing you ever did in your whole life, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. I second that. Julie thirds that.
Yeah.
You've been listening to the Real Recovery Podcast. I'm Peter with
Julie.
and
John.
We're here with John. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, John.
That's a wrap on today's episode. Thanks to each and every one of you for lending us your ears and hearts. Your engagement is what fuels our passion and keeps this podcast thriving.
We cherish the moments we share here and hope they resonate with you, whether you're on a daily commute, at the gym, or just taking a moment for yourself.
Make sure to head over to our website at realrecoverypodcast.com. While you're there, subscribe to our newsletter for the latest insights and uplifting stories from our community delivered straight to your inbox.
Click that subscribe button on your favorite podcast player too, so you can keep up with every new episode. It's your support that keeps our conversation alive and meaningful.
And if our stories have touched you, consider using the donate button on our site. Your contributions, no matter the size, are deeply appreciated. They help us continue our mission of sharing hope and healing.
Join us beyond the podcast and follow our journey on social media. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and on X, formerly known as Twitter. All the links are on our site, so you can stay connected and be a part of the Real Recovery community every day.
Your likes, shares, and comments not only spread the message of recovery, but also remind us that we're all in this together.
So, until we meet again, remember that recovery is a journey, not a destination, and we'll be here to accompany you every step of the way to recovery, real recovery.
Thanks for listening.